Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kelly Ayat. We're going chapter by chapter through my brand new book called I Am Kelphaba. You can grab your very own copy at the link in my bio or grab a copy on Amazon. We're going chapter by chapter so I can share more insights, details, and information that I wasn't able to get into my book. So let's go ahead and jump in. So my book is broken into 3 acts. Every single act has 5 scenes. And so today we are talking about Act 1, Scene 1. This one is called I'm Not That Girl. Here it is right here. Every single chapter I have titled with a nod to the musical Wicked. So if you're a fan of musical theater and specifically Wicked, you will see themes throughout my book with a nod to Wicked and musical theater. This chapter kind of introduces you guys to me, who I was as a kid, and some background. So for those of you that aren't familiar with my book is really about my 15 years in vocational ministry. I talk a lot about overcoming the villain of insecurity, and I talk about my wins, my losses, my lessons learned, and really how ministry and the professional part of my job intertwine significantly with my personal life, and how the Lord really worked through me to overcome a lot and really get me to a place where I felt free to kind of figure out what was next. So in this chapter, I open it up with an excerpt from an Instagram post from a few years ago. And I talk about who I was as a kid, that I collected Beanie Babies, which I still do, that I liked to pretend I was Pocahontas and climb trees at my house, how I loved to make PowerPoint presentations and dioramas just for fun. I sum it up with this. It says, to sum it up, I was a creative, I was insecure, theatrical, humorous, and I was a dreamer. I carried a curiosity with me that drove me to spaces of romanticized versions of life and the world, while yearning for a secure foundation of love. Not that I could have articulated any of that as a child, but I know that's how often I see the world today. This vision helps me to see possibilities that others often can't, and I'm driven by a let's just see what happens approach because I am okay with failure. Why? Because failure is a teacher that challenges you, that grows you, and eventually is the thing that helps you succeed. I think what's interesting about my story and my experience in particular is I do have this dynamic dichotomy within me that struggles deeply with insecurity, but also there's this odd confidence that exists because I'm very comfortable with failure. I feel okay with just trying something and seeing what happens. I also talk a little bit about my rebellious spirit. I am known to do the opposite of what someone says to do or not do. The example that I use often is if you are telling me to go to an ice cream shop and I'm following you, or you tell me to take a left, I'm going to take a right and I'm going to figure out my own route there. And sure, that has served me well in a lot of ways, and that has served me not well in a lot of ways, as you can imagine. But my insecurity, I think, started when I was really, really young. And I think there's a few areas that I could probably pinpoint that really dredged that up in me. But as a child, I was very curious. As a child, I wanted to understand the why. As a child, I wanted to figure out and fail on my own terms. I didn't want to be guarded. I didn't want to be held back. But what's so interesting about that concept is I describe insecurity as a villain in my life because I do believe it has been villainous. The villain always hold you back from your full potential. The villain wants to keep you from being the best and greatest version of yourself. The villain, aka the enemy in my story, was the thing that kept me from being the most whole, confident version of who God created me to be. I think what I learned, because I talk about in my preface in my book, I love musical theater. I love performing. I love being on stage. I love being a character specifically. And so I think I was able to use that tactic as kind of a mask for my insecurity. A lot of my ministry life, a lot of my professional life, and my personal life too, I've been someone in front of people. I've been on camera delivering information when I created content for years. Like I was on video regularly. I was up on stage. Leading trainings or talking to parents or speaking at conferences. I was leading meetings as a supervisor and as a director of the ministry. I was on and in front of people a lot. So it's always interesting throughout my life. People who know that I've struggled with insecurity or have found that out about me are always really surprised. And I don't say that for any other reason than just to say how interesting. I don't think people experience me as insecure. I don't think that people experience me as a doubtful person. But truly, I have navigated a lot of my life feeling deeply insecure about who I am, what I bring to the table, whether or not it's good enough. And that has plagued me. And I think it has held me back in a lot of different ways. But there's also been times where I've told myself, you have to just do it, even though you're not feeling 100%. And I think that's where my confidence maybe showed up, is in that masking. I think that I do have a sense of humor. I think that I do communicate well. And so people are normally surprised when they hear that I'm insecure. But me masking was never an attempt to be deceptive to anybody, but it really was me trying to just figure out desperately how to just get through life without coming across as someone who couldn't handle. But I get very overwhelmed in crowds of people, especially in crowds where I'm not familiar with individuals, in unfamiliar places. I don't do well with surprises. So there's parts of how I operate that you're like, yeah, that makes sense a little bit. But I also, when I'm in a space with the people that I feel the safest and most comfortable with, I'm a really good time. So anyway, as I go on in my book, I give you a little bit more insight into where I was and who I was before I stepped into ministry. Ministry was never on the forefront of my mind. To be honest with you, don't even know that was like a thing. I didn't know vocational ministry was a thing. I know people worked at churches. I grew up in church. I got it, but that was never anything I really thought about. Right out of high school, I graduated and immediately got a job at Starbucks, and I worked at Starbucks for 6 years. I moved up into leadership within about 6 months of being there, and that's also a theme in my life. I've never sought out leadership. I don't want to be in charge. I don't want to be the person at the forefront. But I've always been placed in leadership positions, and so it's challenged me in a lot of good and really difficult ways. But I moved up in leadership, and I loved my job at Starbucks. I talk a lot about that. And after about 6 years at Starbucks, it got me through college, and I graduated from college at the end of 2009 in December with a communications degree. And why was I a communications major? I wanted a degree that got me out of college quick, and there were some classes in the communications degree that were theater classes. And so I told my counselor, sign me up. I'll be a communications major. Seems like a legit major. I'll take it. Let's do this thing. And so I finished college, and out of college, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I had thought maybe I'll be a graphic designer, an interior designer. Maybe I'll just be a stay-at-home mom and I'll marry someone rich or something like that. I didn't really have a career pursuit. I kind of just wanted to be an artist who lived on the streets in Paris, France. But that just, I guess, whatever, wasn't a realistic pursuit. So I graduated college. I went back to school to start my teaching credential. And while I was going to school to get my teacher credential, I was in church on a weekend, and there was an ad up on the screen that said, hey, we're looking for a front desk receptionist. Now, I don't like talking on the phone. I don't like when people call me. I don't want to answer phone calls. So I thought, oh, cool, I'll apply for that job. So I applied for the job. I went through an interview process, and they ended up offering me the job. And they actually asked if I'd be willing to do half of my job working the front desk, and half of my job would be running this mobile coffee cart that the church had, because I had experience in coffee. So I took the job. I left Starbucks. And so I had planned to stay at the church for maybe 6 months, a year at the most, while I was working on my credential. I applied to be a substitute teacher. I went through that whole process. And I share in my book how the first phone call I got freaked me out so much that I never went into substitute. And that was it for me. And not too long after that, after doing a few rounds of shadowing at my elementary school, I realized I don't want to be a teacher either. So I stopped my credential program after about a year. And so I was at this church working. And again, I thought, maybe a year at the most as I figure out what's next. I was in a relationship at the time, and we were talking about marriage. And so I had to figure out, what's my career? What's the plan? And I just didn't know. And my first few months on staff at this church, I didn't really connect with anybody. So even more so, I think that spoke to, this is temporary. This is not long-term at all. I share a little bit more about some of the things that I was feeling and thinking while I was on staff at the church, and how things were temporary, and how I just didn't know what the plan was. And it's always so funny how when we make our own plans, God always has a different one. I continued working at this job, answering phone calls. It was fine, but I didn't feel connected to anybody. And that's when I met Jordan. Jordan, for those of you that know me, would later become my husband. But I talk about that specific story in the next chapter. And we'll talk about how my plan to be in that ministry job for no more than a year ended up turning into 15 years in vocational ministry. But we'll talk more about that later. Thanks so much for hanging out today. That's a little bit more about Act 1, Scene 1. I'm not that girl. And if you want to follow along, make sure that you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss any notifications or videos. Make sure you grab a copy of my book so you guys can follow along. You can grab it at the link in my bio, or you can find it on Amazon. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you guys next time.